Somebody wanted to know, how do I get my teenage son with Asperger's syndrome to go to school when he has anxiety?
Yeah, that's of course a very big issue, and so I have a huge lecture on anxiety. Anxiety is a big issue for a lot of children, and at this point, I think what you have to do as a parent is you have to focus on the anxiety and not on the Asperger's. So in other words, what are some things you can do to try to reduce the anxiety? Okay, so first of all, with all people, when you have anxiety, it's essentially it's a fear of the unknown. It's kind of what's going to happen at school. And I find that with our kids who are higher functioning, our kids with Asperger's, a lot of the issue they're concerned about is things that we would hope for, because our more affected children don't really experience things like embarrassment and so on, but our kids with Asperger's do. They start to recognize how certain things are very difficult for them, how they're different from their peers, and they get embarrassed, obviously. And so there's many different things, short-term things. Here are some ideas. Try to find one friend or a peer, someone in his class with whom he can hang out outside of school. Now, they don't have to become the best of friends, but as long as it's someone who is sort of a companion or someone that he can occasionally hang out with in school, that would be a very, very helpful thing. Being alone for kids is a very, very embarrassing thing. They don't really, all kids, if they have one other person with them, it doesn't necessarily matter who that is. As long as they're not alone, that really helps kids a lot. The second thing is, you'd have to do play dates and try to see if there's any way to get the child connected to your child in some way outside of school. Second thing is, research has shown that any kind of item that your child has with them that is, I guess, I don't know, I want to say like a cool item or something that is the current fad or whatever it is. Like right now, unfortunately, these items are usually expensive items. Yes. So right now, of course, it happens to be like the Beats Vitre headphones, that are like $300-400, and I see kids in high school wearing them, which is pretty amazing to me, probably even in middle school as well. And things like that automatically make you cool. Yeah. And that's sort of an important thing. And it doesn't have to be something expensive. Obviously, there are other things. The cool kids are usually also kids whose parents are somehow involved in some activity. I know that in my kids' middle school, for instance, the coolest kid was the student council president. Another group of kids that were very cool in my kids' classes were the drama kids who were in drama. So it's kind of like, you just have to pay attention to what's going on in your child's school and who are the popular kids and what aspect of things can you help develop that will make your child somewhat more popular. It doesn't have to be popular, but just as long as he doesn't stand out, he sort of fits in and if he stands out for something that is making him look cool. Yeah. Now, I'm just trying to deal right now with the embarrassment factor, but then there's anxiety things as well. Make sure your child is sleeping well. Make sure that you give your child some anxiety type exercises that help with anxiety. Give him ways out. For instance, teach him, okay, in school, when do you feel really nervous? Talk to him, find out what is making him really anxious. And let's assume he's fine in class because the attention isn't on him, but maybe it's lunch period. And teach him that there are other things he can do during lunch period. A lot of kids will, for instance, go hang out in the band room or the gym or the library or something like that, so that he's not necessarily wandering around and feeling kind of under a spotlight. this is a very important discussion, because you'll find out if your child's actually in some ways being bullied or is being placed in a situation that makes him very uncomfortable. Now, these are just, go online and look at my anxiety lecture. I think I have a whole ton of ideas about how to help kids with anxiety. Usually, even a little thing like giving him like a little object, like, a lot of people will use something like some sort of like a rabbit's foot or a talisman of some type. My daughter this morning, I gave her a necklace a while ago, which is just one of those, a unity circle. And she said, like, I love it so much, like I'm constantly playing with it, and I realize it's becoming like a little clutch, like something she'll go to. So something like that, that he can even have in his pocket, will help reduce his anxiety. Breathing exercises are always good. In the morning, he could actually do breathing exercises, and you could teach him some meditation or desensitization. I mean, the main intervention is desensitization, and that has to do with identifying what is causing anxiety and then shaping him to gradually be able to desensitize himself against those stimuli that are closer and closer to the actual anxiety-provoking thing. But that's a lot. Those are a lot of ideas, and I think before you do, or as you think about doing any of those, it's really important to recognize if he is or isn't able to cope by himself. Sometimes our kids are placed in school and they really aren't able to cope on their own yet. This is one of the reasons that I'm very, very adamant about my children here at CARD not being exposed to school without an aide unless they have a certain level of social and communication competence. It's very important to me, because I don't want my kids going to school being made fun of, feeling embarrassed, feeling left out. I don't want any of that to happen to begin with. So I will always have a one-to-one shadow or an aide with the child who will not only distract, but will kind of help the interactions go well, and will be someone who is supportive of our child and helpful to our child. So that's in the most extreme cases, of course, that's the direction to go.
Okay, so for a teenager, then, is it unreasonable if I'm just thinking about all the different variables here, that you've got a child who's having such anxiety that it's preventing them from going to school. And you want them to go to school because there's a social situation at school and you want them to grow. And there's the educational aspect of going to school, that you want the academics to be happening there. I mean, I guess they're both educational. But I have heard of parents pulling a child out and homeschooling out of the teen years for a period of time, 6 months or a year, to try to get, so that you don't miss the academics. Is it a thing where you're trying to prioritize and say, if I send them to school and work on the anxiety, how much are we going to accomplish? I guess.
See, I would probably not pull out for half a year or a year even, because I just see that as making things much more difficult the following year.
Okay.
If you are pulling the child out of school, you're not dealing with the most anxiety-provoking factor, which is school.
Okay.
They're no longer exposed to it. Now, you can sit down and talk about it forever, but as long as your child doesn't have to go to school, they're not actually going to practice, being able to overcome it. So, and then the next year it'll be harder, right? Okay. Because now they will have managed to avoid it for a whole year. It'll be much, much harder. So I think the most important with anxiety is to assess what's actually causing the anxiety. And with teenagers, it's sometimes very hard to identify because they don't want to talk about things, or they're roundabout communication. And secondly, if you have Asperger's, it's even harder to identify, right? So, you could potentially do an observation, or have someone do an observation whom your child doesn't know, and try to see how things are going. You could have a conversation with some of the teachers and find out. You need to know what is causing anxiety. And I guarantee you there's something. It's not just going to school. There's something. I know, and it's, we can segue into this longer email.
Yes.
Because one of our very regular viewers, wrote and talked about her older daughter, who may or may not have Asperger's. I'm not quite sure at this point, but hasn't been officially diagnosed, let's put it that way. But the main issue with her is that her daughter, this is familiar to me, this is children who put so much stress. There's so much stress at school these days.
Be perfect, and to be in the AP classes and to get it all done and do all of those things, that you must be in those classes and you must excel in those classes. And sometimes, and what this viewer had written in is that they're having trouble keeping up, that their EF skills are not at the point where they need to be, so it's becoming so stressful.
Right,
they're
and
concerned.
I'm not even, and to be honest with you, I mean, it is a lot of planning, that's very true, but and I have 3 very different children, right? And I have, my oldest, who actually did manage to stay in the game in terms of A's and AP classes and all that and get into a good university that way, was extremely stressed out. I can truly say that. She managed. She did very, very well. Less stressed out in the later years of high school, because I think she kind of figured things out, and much more stressed in the earlier years, where it's simply, but having said that, she would easily spend 3 hours a night studying, at least, maybe 4, sometimes more, and weekends, right?
Yeah.
With my other 2 children, my son just, he gets stressed, but he somehow does the very minimum he needs to in order to go get by. And then my other daughter is just like what this viewer wrote, in that she wants it all. She wants to have the very good grades and the higher level classes, but she also wants to be involved in academics and in after school activities and in like sports and in drama and this and that. And just like, for instance, last night she got home at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then she had 2 tests today, so she had to study until midnight, And so it is ridiculously stressful for our kids these days. And I think, everybody has a different approach to it. Yeah. And I think that it's a matter of just helping our children understand that there's not one solution, there's many. Even if you don't get straight A's, there's always college options and so on. But for this particular case, it's getting to the point where it's very concerning.
Yes.
Because this is a child who is, adamant that she has to take the AP classes. First of all, this is a child who has a sibling on the spectrum, so I think that's an issue that's kind of important as well.
Yeah.
Because however she views that, she's having a hard time, and of course she's nowhere near as affected as her sibling if she's affected.
Right.
And for her, I think there's also this factor of I'm not dumb. I'm not dumb, so therefore I have to take the hardest classes and I have to get straight A's. And I think she's trying to separate herself from the spectrum to some extent and say, this is not my problem.
Right.
And you have to allow her to separate herself, because her individuality is not within the spectrum. It never has been. Right. It never will be. She's very, very different, and she needs to find her own weaknesses. Yeah. Kids that are that high functioning, they have to, just like the rest of us, you really just need to allow them to find their own strengths and weaknesses. She's coping and surviving pretty well, despite this issue, and we'll talk about this issue, right. But this is someone who's taking advanced placement classes, right. And she has friends and so on and so forth. Yeah. So let's not jump to titling her or labeling her in one way or another. Let's allow her to, let's just say she's a typical child who's overstressed, okay? Now, she's stressed to the point where it has turned, a certain level of stress is fine. Once apprehension or anxiety hits a certain higher level, it turns into severe depression. And because it becomes so fear-evoking. Anxiety is fear, right? But a certain level of fear is okay. If you have too much fear, it paralyzes you. Once you're paralyzed, that's depression. And that's exactly what's happening to her. She's missing the alarm, which means that she's sleeping very, very late, which means it's affected her sleep. Okay, and then what's happened, it's a bad cycle she's in. So what it sounds like is She's missing her morning alarm, so she's not making it on the bus. You guys are working, so I don't know if she's able to make it to school or she's skipping school that way, which is bad. When you miss school, especially if you're in an AP class, you're going to fall behind much more.
Yeah.
So it becomes a cycle where you're failing. You will fall back behind, and then it becomes more fear-evoking the next day because now you're behind as well. And therefore, now you really can't sleep. First of all, you're exhausted when you get home, so you take a nap, and then you can't wake up. Whenever a child is not willing to wake up, that's the sure sign of depression.
Okay.
Or unless there's something physiological going on, which, obviously you should check her health. But I'm thinking this sounds like depression, because later she'll wake up and then she's awake doing homework into the middle of the night, which means in the morning she's wiped out again. So this is a bad cycle.
Yeah.
Yes, school is almost over, thank God, this year. I mean, we're all kind of struggling with our kids at the end of the year. It's very hard. I don't think, what I think and I don't know her exact age, but I really think if you want to help her, ask her if she wants a tutor. Often schools will offer you tutors, which might be helpful to her at this time. Perhaps someone, not you, mom, because she's already become kind of, we always blame our moms. Maybe dad or someone else can just assist her with doing some homework, or just spend time with her while she's doing her homework. There are many different things involved here. One is persistence. You have to teach her to persist at tasks. The other one is organization, which a lot of kids miss. That's the task planning stuff that is in executive functions. So obviously you could teach her that, but this is not the time. Over the summer, you'd want to teach her just task planning. You asked the question, what can I do over the summer to give her a head start? Trust me, that's the one thing. Task planning is the most important thing that we can do for our kids, which essentially means everything from what is my homework, how much time do I need to put into this or to prepare for a test, and how do I organize my time scheduling and that sort of thing. And then, most important, how do I reinforce myself? Whenever my kids have finals, I will always put them on a schedule where I'll say, you study for an hour, you come down for half an hour, I give you a snack, you do this. And you go back and study for 2 hours, and you come back and do this. And so they have to learn to reward themselves at intervals, otherwise they'll break down. And it's a lot of that sort of thing. Right now, the single thing you can do is try to help her sleep. And what I would do is not allow her to sleep in the afternoon. Somehow figure out a way that she does not go to sleep at 2 o'clock after school. That's really important. Perhaps she stays at school and does homework there for 2 or 3 days, because if you do that for 2 or 3 days, if she can even manage, her sleep cycle will reset. So she'll start being really exhausted at night and sleeping, and then in other words, you have to force her to do her homework right after school for just 2 days, maybe. And maybe give her melatonin or something to help her sleep at night. The cycle of anxiety is really interesting because it gets worse the less we sleep. And the more anxiety we have, the less we sleep. So it just keeps feeding itself. So you really need to help her sleep better. That's the number one thing.
So that's got to be the priority for the next couple of days.
Exactly. Because in 2 or 3 days, in about 3 days, our sleep cycle is reset. So if you can try to keep her up, let her just sleep regular hours, and it doesn't matter if she throws a fit or gets upset, whatever, you got to get her through regular hours. I'm telling you, she'll feel a lot better. And then, of course, there's a lot of natural and homeopathic things that are very calming. And you can go to a Whole Foods and buy a whole bunch of these, like valerian and things like this.
Magnesium is great.
Magnesium. But there's also things that are like a St. John's wort. Valerian. These are things that are very calming. So, maybe put some of that in her drink or food or so on.
And of course, because it's a mom who has a younger child who's on the spectrum,
Right.
you're juggling. You're juggling, and it's probably stressful for you.
Tremendously.
I would think it's time to call in some reinforcements and say, hey, I need some extra help because I got to put a little bit more attention. We always talk about when the kitchen's on fire. When the kitchen's on fire, stuff gets messy in the living room.
That's
right.
right.
Because you're
That's
putting
right.
out the fire in the kitchen.
That's right.
Now you've got a kitchen in the fire and one in the front bathroom. So,
Right.
you
do need help. I mean,
Yeah.
I sometimes I feel like if I had more help, things would be so much smoother. You got to get some help. I don't know
Yeah.
how you can right now, but
Yeah.
just even if it's temporary help.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, keep us posted and let us know how things go. And maybe as we get closer to the summer, I want to be talking some more about things that we can all be doing over the summer to help our kids, like these schedules and planning time. I think I need that class as much as your teenager
I think I should
needs
bring
it.
Nikki to teach that class.
All right,
She's
that's
so
it.
good at that.
We'll have Nikki in to teach that class. But really remarkable stuff that you gave us all to think about. I think we should take a short break, and then we're going to be back with some more of your questions, so stick with us. Welcome back to Autism Live. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh for a segment that we call Ask Dr. Doreen. Now, we're going to wade into a little bit of a minefield this morning. Okay. Ready? I got an email this morning that had to do with this as well. We have somebody who wrote in and said, I have a brother with autism, and she wrote, autism suffer. And then she said he's 12 years old. Do we have some sort of hope for recovery? And I got an email this morning from a viewer who is on the spectrum who said, I was so excited. I just found your show and I was watching part of it and I was so excited, and I decided I wanted to learn more about you and about me, they were talking about, and about the people who were involved in the show. And they went and read my bio and saw that I have a son with autism, and that the phrase that I used at that time was that he is recovering from autism. And they said, I am so horrible. My feelings are hurt. I'm offended. And they said, why do those of you who are not on the spectrum use these words, recover and recovering, that it makes it feel like it's a disease. And they were very disappointed. I wrote back a lengthy email to them talking about how I'm learning to choose my words carefully about what I say. But autism is a disorder. My understanding from the DSM-5, it's a disorder. And when I say recovering, I mean from the disabling aspects of autism.
Right. I mean, and this is really an important thing. It's very interesting. If anything, the word disorder should be insulting, right?
Exactly.
But then we all have things like depression or anxiety, and if they become disabling, then they are considered disorders.
Yeah.
And what is that? It means disorder. We're not in order. We're out of order, essentially. And you would say that someone has recovered from depression or has overcome depression or has overcome, I'm sure if we use the word overcome with autism, it would also be somewhat insulting to some people. Yeah. So the concept, I want to be very clear of how I more and more every day that as autism increases and as the spectrum widens, I have come to understand the perspective of individuals on the spectrum who will be offended. I have started to understand that over the last few years. Before, I never really understood why it was offensive, but now I'm beginning to understand that. Having said that, though, I want to explain our perspective, or my perspective at least, and here's my perspective. Whenever you have any kind of thing going on that's different from normal, and normal is just is defined by what most people do. Right. Okay. I'm not even saying something is normal or abnormal. It is simply what. And
it doesn't make it good or bad. We're just saying it's what
it is
the majority does.
The norm. Yeah. That's why the word is normal. It's the norm. It's what most people do, and it's how society has adapted to what most people do. For instance, if you walk in the door and you don't say hello to anyone, that isn't what most people do. Right. Most people, no matter what culture or country you're in, you will greet. So greeting is not, something that defines normality or abnormality. It is simply what most people do. So it becomes something that is expected. Okay. And if you don't greet, there's a lot of stuff that results, that bad stuff. For instance, people will think you're arrogant, you're rude, you'll lose opportunities.
That you don't care.
That you don't care about them, you have no empathy.
Right.
They don't want to be your friend, they won't give you jobs, you will not get into, imagine you go for a college application or something, interview, and you don't greet. Something as very simple as just greeting will affect the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Okay. Just because of the social norms and expectations that have been set around it. Because that's what we're used to, because most people do that.
Right.
Okay. If you don't do that, you will lose out on a lot of things. Now, how do we express? So that's what, to me, that's what a disorder is. And that's actually how the diagnostic manual defines it as well. The diagnostic manual says, and I've said this many times, you could drink yourself to sleep every night. You could have 2 bottles of scotch every night, but no one will ever diagnose you or say there's anything wrong, as long as you're very good to your family and you have a job or you're in school and your adaptive functioning is not in any way influenced.
Right.
Period.
It's not a disorder.
It's not considered a disorder. Something is considered a disorder when it starts to interfere with your day-to-day life. So when, let's say we would have a name for this being, does not greet disorder.
Right.
Then that person, because it would start to affect, they would become isolated, they would not have friends, they would not be able to get the same jobs, they would not be able to go to school, etc., just because of that one feature. That would be considered a disorder because it would make things worse for the individual. It would make them isolated, it would drop them out of society, it would make them depressed, unhappy, anxious, etc. Humiliated and so on. So now let's look at autism. Autism, and there's many gradients of autism, right? So if you are someone who's watching this show and listening to this or reading about Shannon or about us and actually finding offense in that, you naturally will be very, very high functioning on this spectrum, or will have either sort of Asperger's or PDD. So I want to address you very differently than the classical definition of autism, right? So the very higher functioning person can function.
Yeah.
Can function. There's no question. You can function.
Most parents would be thrilled for our children to
be
have
at that
the
level.
type of autism that you have. We're striving for our children to be as capable as you are.
As you are, and I ask you, do you struggle? Do you struggle in certain ways? Do you struggle with friends? Do you struggle understanding people in social settings? Do you misunderstand people's intentions? All that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Has it held you back? And if it has, are there things you would like to learn in your life to improve those things, to get over those obstacles? For instance, if you are that person who doesn't greet, how easy would it be to learn to greet?
Right.
And once you greet people, you will have more friends. People will give you better opportunities. They'll give you better options. They'll respect you. They'll think you care about them, etc., etc. So some very simple changes, interventions, treatments can help anyone who is already functional join the mainstream. Now, those who are actually diagnosed with autism or ASD or autistic disorder as it used to be cannot function independently. Let's be very, very clear with that. These are individuals who are severely affected in their area of social development, in their area of language, communication, and in their which will then influence things like independent skills, adaptive skills, safety skills, academic, everything. They cannot function. So as parents, do we want our children to actually learn all these areas so that they can now join society? Yes, we do. Absolutely, there's no question. With time passing, and with now 1 in 42 boys or 1 in 68 children, pretty soon, who knows? The norm is changing. If you thought about it, as the norm changes, as the majority of people in the world change, then perhaps more and more individuals with high functioning, like PDD or Asperger's, will actually be able to independently survive and not need to in any way learn new skills. But let me tell you, a child who's nonverbal and doesn't have eye contact and is aggressive and has absolutely no desire to be amongst others and has all sorts of also physiological issues and this and that and the other thing, is not happy going through life that way. No. And all we're trying to do is teach our children some skills that will help them go through life. So whether you call it remediation, recovery, assistance, support, tutoring, whatever it is, whatever the word is, our intention with using the word recovered was never something bad. It never implied that you were recovering from something horrible. Right. It simply meant that you were learning skills in order to join the mainstream. And that, I don't know what word we have in English for that, but if we do, we'll be happy to switch to that word. I've been looking for that word.
I'm going to make a new word.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a new word.
Absolutely.
Because it hurts me that it hurts individuals for us to use that word.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, here's a young woman who's writing in about her 12-year-old brother and wants to know, is there a possibility of recovering? And I know from what I have seen that individuals get to the point where they no longer, they're still unique, they're still wonderful, they have their own way of viewing the world. All the good things that we think about that come with autism are still there, but the disabling aspects are no longer there.
That's exactly the point. That's very, very well said. Something took me half an hour and you said it in That's the point, Shannon. That's the point. It's no longer disabling, and that's the issue. And just help us, for those viewers who really are offended by the word recovered, help us find another word. Because wouldn't it be also offensive if we said remediated from autism?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it also be offensive if we said overcome autism?
Yeah.
So is it really the word that is a problem, or is it the fact that we're trying to change an individual who has these symptoms? And why would that be offensive? Because I know some people are just leave us alone, don't change us. And what I need to get through to the audience is, why would you reject change of any kind if it's an improvement, if it's going to help you in the world? And, that's like someone saying, well, it's not necessarily an improvement, but it is.
Yeah.
It really is. Learning how to interact with people, learning how to express yourself, learning how to read, understand other people's intentions, and so on. So these are improvements because they make your life easier.
And I get the sort of double-edged side of it, and the older my child gets, the more I'm learning, right? Yeah. And then he says something and it informs me in another way that I think all the time about when I was trying to teach him how to get out of the car, because he took so long and we were on a very busy street. Every day we would park on this busy street, and I was trying to teach him how to get out of the car. And I said to him finally, I said, look, I just need you to do it this way. In frustration, I said, this is the way you need to do it. And he paused for a second.
You said, why?
And he said, Mom, do you have autism too? Because I was being inflexible. And in that moment, I realized, I need you to do it my way because I'm inflexible. And I see when people say, well, why do our kids have to do it this way? Why doesn't the rest of the world figure out a different way to do it? I understand what that frustration is.
Do you know what? And I'm so glad you said that, because the one thing I wanted to say is, with these current prevalence rates, I don't even know if in another generation or two we will be. We're merging. We're merging right now. The prevalence of autism is going so high. It's just increasing to the point where the world is changing. Absolutely. you guys, you know, this is what's fascinating for me. Think about just 10 years ago, maybe, Shannon, maybe 20 years ago, I don't know. If someone sat around a dinner table 20 years ago and held a little box and just typed in it, 5 people, that would be the most abnormal, ridiculous thing. We'd be laughing at it, right? But that is the norm. Any restaurant you walk into, everyone is on their phones texting someone or something like that. We didn't even have text here a few years ago. It has now taken over our this behavior of calling people, right? So behavior changes over the course of time, but you have to be able to adapt to what the norm is in order to be able to function. It's just that simple.
And my response always is about why we worked so intensively with our son is because that moment a couple of years ago when we were at somebody's house and he wasn't able to connect with the other kids. He wanted to, and he had like 10 of the required 12 skills to be able to connect with the other kids and get them to play, but he was missing 2. And what it resulted in was him laying on the floor in the hallway crying and saying, why can't I get them to play with me?
That's so heartbreaking.
And as a mom, I was like, we will get you the skills. We will work on that so that you will be able to do it, because I want what he wants. And he wants to be able to connect. And he did when he was 3. When he was hitting his head on the kitchen floor, he wanted to connect. He just didn't know how to in a way that didn't hurt him.
I completely understand that. And so really it's an option for people. It really is. It's like, you know, you talk about, just look at typical people. Then why do we ever complain about, why do we think that there's anything odd about people who are hermits? Right? They choose to be. They choose to stay away from society and go and live in a shack somewhere and never come out and talk to anyone at all, ever. Okay. Now, is that a healthy, adaptive life? Well, you know what? If they're fine with it, then they're fine with it. But the issue is, as you're pointing out, most of our kids are not fine with it. They want to be able to interact with other kids, and they want to be able to, gain access to all the things in life that typically developing kids have access to. And having said that, the curve is changing. So please keep that in mind. And as I'm saying, like, we really do understand your perspective, but I really would love some help on differentiating. Is it the word, or is it really the fact that we're trying to help and people feel they don't need help? But why isn't it? And I feel like that's wrong. That's the portion I disagree with. I feel like everyone needs help to improve. That's the whole purpose of our lives. That's why we're here as well, to learn to improve. And if somebody came along in fact, there are people that I learn from all the time, right? That's why we follow people like Deepak Chopra and so on, because they're here to teach us. And if you then look at them and say, why are you claiming to try to teach me anything, and it's offensive that you would think I have anything to learn. That's not the attitude to have either.
No. So back to her question. Her brother's 12 years old and in her words is suffering with autism. And is there some sort of hope for recovery for a 12-year-old? It's a loaded question.
It is, and it's one of those situations where unfortunately I can't respond because I don't know your brother. I don't know his level of impairment. I don't know how affected he is. I have had children who've gone through the process until they were like 13, 14, and then sort of came out of it at that point. But I just don't know his level of impairment.
But we can safely say that progress is available for this 12-year-old.
Absolutely right. There's progress throughout the lifetime. The fact that all of the focus of behavioral intervention is on early childhood means nothing. We use ABA to teach people all day long, all the time. I change behavior here at CARD using ABA throughout all of my staff. So yes, there's a lot.
And by the way, for people who are on the spectrum and people who are not on the spectrum,
anyone here,
we're all making progress. That's what life is about.
Absolutely. I just sent out an email to a bunch of supervisors last night. They responded. I learned something. It's very simple. It's an antecedent, a behavior, and a consequence.
There we go.
And I learned a lot, actually, from my supervisors. So what I'm saying is, we really all are, this is what we're doing. ABA can work for anyone at any time, at any age, any level of deficiency or deficit or problem. But I can't answer because I don't, and recovery is possible for people of different ages depending on the level of impairment. If it's a very, if it's a significant impairment, then I would really not necessarily, I don't think anybody should just be aiming at recovery. I think that is possibly one of the problems with the word recovery, is that it seems to be like a line over which you are recovered and under which you're not. And it's not like that. It's a gradient. It's sort of like, just like you said earlier, you gain enough skills to become able to mingle and find the things in life that you want, and you are then, for your own purposes, recovered. And like I said, once you are no longer struggling in your adaptive life, in your emotional, personal life, you are recovered. I don't care if you still have some of the symptoms. It is no longer considered a disorder or a disability because it's not affecting your personal or your social life.
And progress is progress, and there are many other meaningful outcomes other than recovery.
Absolutely.
So,
oh my gosh.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we should take another break, and then we're going to come back with more with Dr. Granpeesheh for Ask Dr. Doreen. Stick with us. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen and Autism Live. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh and having her answer our questions, which is such a delight. We have something, we're growing a library of videos for the show where experts answer one of the top questions in autism, and we give them 2 minutes in which to do that. Sometimes it feels a little too much like a game show, but and then we are making those available for you on our YouTube page. And our question for Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh this morning is, what is the difference between autism and mental retardation?
Okay. So autism and mental retardation are actually very, very different from each other. I define both sort of from a clinical perspective. Autism is diagnosed when there are a number of different symptoms present, when there's and these symptoms indicate a pretty significant level of, let's say, difficulty within the social area of functioning. So, and as well as the presence of certain stereotypical repetitive behaviors. So autism is only diagnosed when an individual has pretty significant social deficits and pretty significant stereotypical behaviors, okay? And then the new version of autism, you can have different severity levels to those things, and you can have language impairment or minimal language impairment or no language impairment along with it. And you can have intellectual disability or no intellectual disability. Intellectual disability is mental retardation. And mental retardation is only defined as not scoring within the norm on standardized measures of intelligence, IQ. The intelligence measure, the IQ, intelligence quotient, is a fraction, which is your mental age over your chronological age times 100. That's how you get an IQ. So if your mental age is, let's say, 5, and your chronological age is 5, then that fraction becomes 1 times 100 becomes 100. So normal IQ is 100 because our mental age and our chronological age are the same. In other words, we do things that all other people our age do. Okay, so it's the same. So whether you're 50 or 5, your IQ will come out to be 100. Now, if your mental age is higher than, let's say, your chronological age, then of course your IQ becomes above 100. That fraction works out to make your IQ higher. If your mental age is lower, then your IQ becomes lower than 100. And if your mental age is lower, that means mentally you're not doing all the things that people of the same chronological age are doing. That's what IQ is. That's what mental retardation is. Now, mental retardation, to be very, very, clear about it, only begins at scores below 85. So 100 being the normal IQ, 85 to 115 is also kind of within the norm. Anything below that starts to go into borderline and then starts going into mental retardation. So what that means is that the individual's actual abilities as measured on these tests are more than one standard deviation different, more than 15 points different than the vast majority of people, which then starts to make you sort of a much smaller percentage of people. Like you're lower than a very small group of people would have that level of problem, let's say. So autism, while it can include mental retardation, doesn't have to.
Okay.
And so they're very, very different things. In fact, most people with autism don't have mental retardation.
Okay. Thank you so much
Try
for
to
making
keep
that
that in 2 minutes. I don't know if I went over.
I think you did a great job. I think that's wonderful. Now, we also had somebody who wrote in and said, can you recommend some good resources to help me teach my son theory of mind skills? And they said, thank you so much.
Sure, and of course the best resource we have for that is our Skills online program. So I would really recommend that you go to skillsforautism.com, and you will you have a free I think 2-week period on there, and so you can go in and you'll see a section of skills called cognition. It's part of one of the domains that we teach, and cognition is all theory of mind. So in that domain you'll find lessons such as teaching the individual to understand cause and effect, perspective taking, and everything that goes with follows perspective taking. So like being able to tell jokes, lies, understand other people's feelings, etc.
It's actually a very fun part of the curriculum.
It is. It's an awesome part of the curriculum.
It's fun to work through with a child. That's surprising. Like you wouldn't think that would be the case, but it actually is very fun.
Right. So true.
So definitely check that out. We also had somebody who wrote in and said, I have a 5-year-old that I'm trying to potty train. He will sit down, but no action. Any tips? Also, he's about to age out of the early development program in North Carolina, and we don't want him to get thrown in the public school system. What options do we have?
That's so cute. He will sit down, but no action.
No action.
Potty training you have to actually teach. I've recommended this many times as the Fox and Azrin procedure. It should be found easily online as well. And it is a very well-known behavioral procedure. You essentially, over the course of, I'll just quickly summarize it, but you should read it because there's a lot of detail involved with it. Over the course of 2 or 3 days, what you really massively give your child a lot of liquids. And this is a training procedure that requires a lot of attention for about 2 days. And it might be shorter, but it might go the duration of the 2 days or a little bit longer. But essentially, when we do potty training, we really focus the whole day on the child. And you will make the bathroom a very pleasant place because you'll be spending most of the day in the bathroom. So you will start with sitting on the bathroom for longer intervals of time, usually about 15-minute intervals. And since he's been drinking a lot of water, he will actually want to, or drinks, juice, whatever, he will actually have more to void. So you will start with a longer period of time on the bathroom, on the toilet, and very short intervals off the toilet. So like 15 minutes on, 1 minute off, 15 minutes on, 1 minute off. So that's why you kind of need to make sure the bathroom is a pleasant place. You could have a TV set in there, or books, music, whatever is interesting, games, and so on. And as your child has success during the when your child has success, obviously you allow a break. And massive reinforcers.
The party.
Right, massive. Reinforce the child like there's no tomorrow. And then what you do is you gradually reduce the interval sitting on the toilet and increase the interval of time off the toilet so that it reverses. By the end of the second day, you're hoping that you are able to have the child off the toilet for 15 to 30 minute intervals and then go to the toilet void and then come back out. So it's a gradual shaping procedure. It's very, very successful. And if it doesn't work the first time, just try it again another weekend. It is, I do suggest that you get some professional help, because you don't want to mess around with potty training too many times and make it unsuccessful. You don't want to make it aversive. But it is something that you should have great success with if you have someone who's a behaviorist. Behavior analyst, yeah.
And then in terms of they don't want to go to public school in North Carolina, do you have any recommendations, anything that you know of in North Carolina?
No, I don't, unfortunately, but I'm trying to figure out a way to put them in touch with the director of IBT, obviously, who lives in North Carolina. So it would be maybe a good thing if you went on the Institute for Behavioral Training. Cecilia Knight, and also her husband, Mark Knight, who has his own agency out there, would be very good people to talk to. And the best way to get in touch with them is through IBT, the Institute for Behavioral Training.
ibehavioraltraining.com.
ibehavioraltraining.com, and ask if you could have a small consult with Cecilia Knight, and she might be able to refer you to Mark, and Mark will have a lot of information about your choices.
Okay, really good to know. I think at some point we should do could we do a whole hour on potty training?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you should probably do a whole hour on potty training and do it with one of the research team, like Jonathan.
Okay.
He was just saying to me that now that we have them over, like really going into all of our cases, he said the majority of people are asking questions about potty training.
Yeah, it is always an amazing thing to me, because as a parent, it's the single most overwhelming thing, right? It's it's like on the big five, that they're going to get, and your life changes when your child is potty training. And to BCBAs, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday. Oh, we're going to potty train. It's no big deal.
Yeah.
And I would love to bring those two things together, those two perspectives, to make it more possible for parents.